my understanding, and I mean, I'm certainly not an expert on how people lived 100, 150 years ago, but my understanding in the United States is that there were actually that the country was just thick with these social organizations that operated sort of as insurance groups. If you were part of well, not a guild exactly, but Freemasons and various societies partly operated as insurance. And the idea would be that you would show up in this association, you'd stick around with it for a long time, and if somebody in the association was having a hard time, everybody else would come and chip in, and maybe there would be a collection, and maybe it would actually be some kind of a formal insurance. But that the idea was people would look after each other, and sometimes it was a church, and sometimes it was a fraternal organization or a sororital, is that the word, organization, but they existed. And I think there was a kind of a crowding out where once government took over a lot of social insurance functions, that was sort of a major reason that these different societies existed. And so once that was taken over by government, then it gets a lot harder to have these societies. I think there were probably other reasons for their decline. I mean, with greater geographical mobility, it's sort of hard to keep multiple generations in these things and even just keep members in place. So it feels complicated.
Yeah, for sure. I think my set of examples just borrows from Eastern Europe rather than from
Yeah.
the more enlightened West, where you guys have all sorts of associations and clubs, or used to have, pre
Yeah.
Putnam, that we don't really that much like that. Being voluntary labor in Eastern Europe just means something that the communists imposed on you. Voluntary was just meant the opposite, like many things under communism. Yeah, people don't really do that stuff. It's the high trust, low trust society, dynamic. And we maybe are like slowly careening towards a higher trust society, mostly by association with the European Union and standard that they kind of have to impose for us to be working with them. But people are very mistrustful. Like, it's very hard to set up a bowling league, when everyone's like, I don't know. I don't trust you guys. Are you related to me? If not, you have to leave the bowling league.
Yeah.
But I think you're right in terms of what what was going on in the West, essentially, because these are typically kind of Anglo-Saxon institutions that were imported in ways. And I guess you have that in Belgium and Germany. There's similar things happening, but it's very, very Western. The idea that you can scale trust beyond your next of kin and not get bitten in the first iteration of that.
Yeah. But maybe less and less over time. I mean, it does seem like there's been sort of a decline in at least the level of trust that people are willing to reveal to people asking in surveys. So
what do you think? I mean, there's all sorts of spicy explanations for this. Obviously, the fact that the homogeneity is dropping. If you had kind of a homogeneous society, you would have essentially had almost a kin relationship to people around you, and people who look like you. It's easier to trust them even instinctively. But this is one area that people point to that might have eroded trust in the West. But what do you think could be tied into this? Like why is trust going down? Because that's what I've noticed as well in London, and that was also part of why I moved back to Romania.
yeah, it's really a chicken and egg problem. I mean, are there fewer societies because trust is dropping? Are there multiple other factors? And I don't exactly have a clear idea about this. I grew up in Minnesota, which back in the day, in Minnesota and North Dakota, which I think were pretty high trust. Especially the town I grew up in was Grand Forks, which was maybe 50,000 people. Small agricultural town primarily, although there's a university there, and regularly hit by natural disasters, which I think were actually very good for community. Actually, that's a good point. My town was destroyed by a flood in 1997. And I mean, really destroyed. Everybody left the town. There was a mandatory evacuation order. I would guess probably tens of thousands of houses were destroyed in a town of 50,000. And it was completely gutted. President Clinton flew in on a helicopter to survey the site and declare aid, and um, it was pretty homogeneous for sure. And there was an air base to the north, so there was a little bit of ethnic variation that just came into the air base, but even that was pretty rare in the town itself. I mean, it was a bunch of Germans, but primarily Scandinavians. And Scandinavian immigrants have a reputation for being, pretty community oriented. And I think they carry that out to the high prairie. So, I mean, I can definitely see an argument for homogeneity just based on my experiences. I can see an argument for having to endure things as a community as engendering high trust. There's a book by Sebastian Junger called Tribe. And as a matter of social science, I some parts of it made me wince, but his main point at least resonated, which is that there are some features of skilled society and maybe um, just society generally where once it gets comfortable and once it gets rich and there's less shared hardship, you start to see things resonating as a community less. And even the reimposition of some kind of a shared misery can actually be very good for a community and for engendering community. And when humans are suddenly in a situation where they have to solve a problem as a group, they tend to become massively pro-social. And then when you take away that perhaps that external threat or that challenge, well, then they kind of drift off into atomization again. And I came out of social science, and I've become pretty skeptical of any kind of claim made by anybody in social science anywhere. But I mean, it's a good story, and I can see it for sure. But
Yeah.
it just seems like a really hard problem. Europe may be this den of sociality, saw the printing press introduced, and then 100 years of religious war. So what happens when you introduce the internet? That feels like it's going to just inevitably cause a lot of changes to society, and in the same way that the printing press did. Or if you want to go more directly to the UK, if you look at the enclosure movement, I have no idea what that did to society and what country life in Scotland and the UK generally was like before the enclosure movement. But I'm going to guess that was massively disruptive, and it probably just destroyed lots of existing social institutions and forced people off the land that their ancestors have been tilling for hundreds of years. So there are definitely a lot of available historical metaphors of maybe cases of just these long-standing societies being maybe brutally disrupted by technological or economic trends.